You are 6 years old, standing in the marble halls of the Palatine Palace in Rome during the year 395 AD. Your small fingers clutch a wooden doll, the only possession from your childhood you're allowed to keep. The silk stola draped around your tiny frame weighs more than you do. Its purple threads worth more than most citizens will see in their lifetime. Through the towering columns, you glimpse the forum below, where thousands gather to witness what they believe is your moment of glory. But you don't understand glory. You only understand that the strange man with the golden wreath keeps staring at you with eyes that make your stomach feel hollow. Your name is Galla Placidia, though today you will become something else entirely. Augusta. Empress. Wife to a man who has ruled the known world since before you could walk. Emperor Honorius, your half-brother, 25 years your senior, has decided that political alliance requires sacrifice. Your sacrifice. The priests chant in Latin you don't comprehend, while incense burns so thick it makes your eyes water. You want to run to your nurse, to hide in the kitchens where the servants speak kindly and give you honey cakes. Instead, you stand frozen as the most powerful man in the Western Roman Empire approaches, his ceremonial toga trailing behind him like spilled blood. This is not a fairy tale. This is the reality of imperial marriage in the dying days of Rome, where children became currency and political survival trumped human decency. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The year 395 AD marked the beginning of the end for the Western Roman Empire, though no one standing in that palace ceremony could have imagined it. The empire stretched from Britain to the Black Sea, from the Rhine to the Sahara Desert. Legions still marched in perfect formation. Aqueducts still carried fresh water to cities that housed over 1 million souls. But beneath the marble facades and golden statues, rot had set in. Barbarian tribes pressed against the borders. The economy strained under the weight of constant warfare. And in the imperial palaces, desperate rulers made increasingly desperate choices to maintain their grip on power. Emperor Honorius had inherited a crumbling throne at age 10 when his father Theodosius the Great died unexpectedly. Now 25, he ruled the Western Empire while his brother Arcadius controlled the East from Constantinople. Both emperors understood that survival meant more than military might. It required alliances, marriages, and the careful manipulation of bloodlines that could legitimize their rule or destroy it entirely. When Honorius decided to marry his 6-year-old half-sister Galla Placidia, he wasn't thinking about love or even lust. He was thinking about the Gothic chieftain Alaric, who had already sacked Athens and was now marching toward Rome with an army of 100,000 warriors. The marriage ceremony itself was a masterpiece of imperial propaganda designed to project strength while concealing weakness. Every detail had been choreographed to impress foreign ambassadors and Roman citizens alike. The bride wore silk dyed with murex shells, each thread worth its weight in silver. The groom's laurel crown contained emeralds from Egypt and pearls from the Indian Ocean. Musicians played instruments carved from ivory, while dancers performed routines that had entertained emperors for 3 centuries. The Senate attended in their finest togas, applauding at precisely the right moments. Foreign dignitaries offered gifts of gold and spices, their speeches translated by scribes who had studied rhetoric for decades. But behind the pageantry, a 6-year-old girl experienced something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Contemporary accounts, written by court historians who witnessed the ceremony, describe Galla Placidia as remarkably composed for her age. She didn't cry during the 3-hour ritual. She didn't resist when the golden wedding bands were placed on her tiny fingers. She didn't flinch when Honorius kissed her forehead to seal their union before thousands of witnesses. This composure, the historians noted with approval, proved her imperial breeding and natural dignity. What these same historians didn't record were the details that survived in private letters and personal memoirs discovered centuries later. Galla Placidia's nurse, a Gallic woman named Thermantia, kept a secret diary throughout her service in the imperial household. Her entries, written in a mixture of Latin and Celtic that took scholars decades to translate, paint a very different picture of that wedding day. The little princess had not eaten for 2 days before the ceremony, too nervous to keep food down. She had nightmares about the strange man who would become her husband, dreams where he chased her through endless palace corridors while she called for a mother who had died when she was 3. The political calculations behind this marriage reveal the brutal pragmatism that governed late Roman imperial policy. Galla Placidia was not just Honorius's half-sister, but also the daughter of Theodosius the Great and his second wife Galla. This made her one of the most valuable unmarried women in the empire, her bloodline connecting her to both the Theodosian dynasty and the old Roman aristocracy. By marrying her, Honorius accomplished several goals simultaneously. He prevented her from being married to a potential rival who might use her bloodline to claim the throne. He reinforced his own legitimacy by connecting himself more closely to their father's legacy. And he sent a message to the Gothic tribes that Rome remained strong enough to conduct imperial ceremonies even as barbarian armies approached the city walls. The wedding feast that followed the ceremony lasted for 7 days and 7 nights, a deliberate echo of the great celebrations that had marked imperial victories in Rome's golden age. The palace kitchens worked around the clock to prepare delicacies from every corner of the empire. Peacocks stuffed with dates and honey, wine from vineyards in Gaul that had been aged for 20 years, oysters shipped alive from Britain in barrels of seawater, spices from India that cost more than most citizens earned in a year. The emperor's guests reclined on couches covered with silk, while slaves fanned them with ostrich feathers, and musicians played compositions that had been written specifically for the occasion. But while the adults celebrated their political triumph, the 6-year-old bride sat at the head table in a chair too large for her small frame, picking at food she couldn't identify, listening to conversations in languages she didn't understand. Palace protocol required her to remain present for the entire feast, to smile when spoken to accept the congratulations of strangers who praised her beauty and maturity. By the 3rd day, according to Thermantia's diary, Galla Placidia had developed a fever from exhaustion. By the 5th day, she was falling asleep at the table, despite the noise and chaos surrounding her. The consummation of this marriage, thankfully, would not occur for many years. Roman law and custom recognized that such young brides needed time to mature before becoming wives in the full sense. But the political marriage was complete, the alliance sealed, and the 6-year-old princess found herself trapped in a web of imperial intrigue that would define the rest of her remarkable life. The immediate aftermath of the wedding ceremony revealed the harsh realities that awaited young Galla Placidia in her new role as child empress. While Roman law protected her from physical consummation, it offered no protection from the psychological warfare that defined imperial court life. Within days of the ceremony, she found herself at the center of deadly political machinations that would have challenged experienced adults, let alone a bewildered 6-year-old who still played with dolls. The palace that became her prison was a labyrinth of marble corridors and hidden passages where every conversation carried the potential for betrayal. Court officials who had smiled and bowed during the wedding ceremony now watched her every movement with calculating eyes. They understood what she could not: that her marriage to Honorius had made her simultaneously one of the most powerful and most vulnerable people in the empire. As the emperor's wife and sister, she possessed theoretical authority over millions of subjects. As a child, she remained utterly dependent on adults whose loyalty shifted with political winds. Her daily routine became a carefully choreographed performance designed to project imperial dignity while concealing her fundamental helplessness. Each morning, teams of slaves would dress her in robes that had been selected by court officials to send specific political messages. Purple silk on days when foreign ambassadors visited to emphasize her imperial status. White linen during religious ceremonies to highlight her supposed purity. Gold-threaded stolas when addressing the Senate to remind them of her connection to the wealth and power of the Theodosian dynasty. She learned to stand perfectly still for hours while these garments were arranged and rearranged, understanding instinctively that any sign of childish impatience would be interpreted as weakness. The education that began immediately after her marriage bore no resemblance to normal childhood learning. Instead of stories and games, she received instruction in the brutal realities of imperial survival. Greek tutors taught her to recognize the subtle differences between genuine respect and calculated flattery. Latin masters drilled her in the formal speeches she would need to deliver at state functions. Philosophy teachers, many of them former advisors to her father Theodosius, explained the complex web of alliances and enmities that determined who lived and who died in the imperial court. Most disturbing were the lessons about her own family. Galla Placidia learned that her husband-brother Honorius had ordered the execution of their cousin Serena just 2 years before their marriage, accusing her of treason when she had merely disagreed with his military strategy. She discovered that their father Theodosius had eliminated dozens of potential rivals during his rise to power, including his own relatives, when political necessity demanded it. These were not cautionary tales, but instruction manuals, teaching her that survival in the imperial family required the willingness to destroy anyone who posed a threat, regardless of blood relationship or personal affection. The Gothic crisis that had partially motivated her marriage intensified throughout 396 AD, transforming the young empress into a living symbol of Roman defiance. When Alaric's armies appeared on the horizon outside Rome, Honorius paraded his child bride before the terrified population, using her presence to argue that the empire remained strong and confident. She stood on palace balconies while crowds gathered below, her small figure draped in imperial purple, waving mechanically as instructed, while Gothic war horns echoed across the hills surrounding the city. Behind the public displays of strength, panic consumed the imperial household. Servants whispered about evacuation plans and hidden treasures. Court officials burned sensitive documents and prepared to flee to safer cities. Foreign ambassadors quietly departed, citing urgent business elsewhere. But Galla Placidia remained, too young to understand the full scope of the danger, too valuable politically to be sent away, too powerless to protect herself if the city fell. The siege that followed tested every aspect of her carefully constructed imperial persona. Food shortages meant that even the imperial table no longer groaned under exotic delicacies. Palace windows were barricaded against Gothic arrows, leaving the corridors dim and oppressive. The magnificent ceremonies that had defined court life ceased entirely, replaced by emergency councils and desperate negotiations. Through it all, the 6-year-old empress was expected to maintain her dignity, to appear calm and confident even as the world she knew crumbled around her. The story of Galla Placidia reminds us that history's most powerful empires were built on the broken childhoods of those who had no choice in their fate. Behind every marble statue and golden coin lay children sacrificed to political necessity, their innocence traded for temporary alliances that would crumble within decades. The little girl who clutched her wooden doll in that palace ceremony would survive to become one of history's most influential women, but at a cost no child should ever pay.